And the purpose of this meeting is to hear from Tanya, the financial officer from Pioneer Valley Regional School District, who's asked to meet. She's been meeting with the various towns. I believe this is third one.
Number 3.
And so she's going to give us some information. And there's been a handout to the town officials here. We've all got one. Thank you.
You're welcome. So the original intent of these meetings is to touch base with you guys, kind of just have a brief overview of what the budget looks like, what the budget's going to look like going into FY20, and also answer some of the questions that you guys also had. Even though we have the school committee meetings, it's hard for everyone to ask all the questions that they want to ask and get the answers that they want to have answered, maybe in the way that they need them discussed. So first I want to just kind of go through the questions that you guys have here. I know one of the first concerns that's not on here was what the status is of the overseer and where all the towns are with the school lunch deficit that the towns agreed to pay. That's been the hot topic. So Rick Kingsley is the overseer that has been appointed to the district. He currently meets with me once a week. We have various emails. I provided numerous reports to him. He's been meeting with the state representatives, Jay, Mary Jane, and Ruth. So they've met a couple times, and he is basically at the point now where he's reporting to them to let them know where he feels we are with our budget, what our internal controls are, and if he feels like we're moving in the right direction.
He has called, I believe he's called each of the finance committee chairs,
Yes.
right?
Right.
We have
Yep.
Bernardston here and we have Leiden here. And he called me last, I believe it was Thursday.
Okay,
and
so he
talked.
did touch base with you then?
Yes, he has.
Okay, so I don't know what the outcome of those calls were, but my recommendation to the state and himself was that we allow the towns to pay this year's allotment of their $90,000 of the $270, and the remaining portion will be funded through the deficit financing bond, because it is really illegal for us to carry a deficit on our books. So that was my recommendation, and I'm hoping that that's what they've moved forward with. I haven't heard back from him since he's spoken to all of you, but I should hear from him probably tomorrow. We usually talk on Tuesdays.
Okay.
So the first question that you guys had was there was $116,211 increase in the income from what the prior administration had originally budgeted. And that seems like a lot of money, especially in the situation we're in right now. So the first sheet you have in front of you is just the revenue budget for FY19. You can see what our FY18 budget was, what the original FY19 voted was, as well as the revised. You'll notice that a major portion of the increase in the budget was actually for transportation. The reason for that is the state increased the percentage of reimbursement on the transportation from, I believe, 70% to 73%. There's some other factors in there as well. Chapter 70 is typically more on the final governor's budget than, the proposed. The entire budget usually is, and we kind of had it in our favor that we were revising this budget and we're able to capture those final governor's budget numbers. So that was to our benefit. And the same with your charter school reimbursements, those went up a little bit. The Medicaid reimbursements are up $32,000. That's not necessarily a state aid Chapter 70, but those are Medicaid reimbursements that are based on students that we have in our district that are served through Mass Health, Medicaid, and that has seen an upward trend, and I budgeted that based on what we had last year, and we continue to have students with increased needs, so I expect to see that continue to increase. So those are the four numbers that made up the $116,211 that you guys were questioning. The second piece of that was questioned as far as the revenue budget was the tuition and fees. The original number that was in the budget of $155,560 was strictly for the 10 kids that were going to be in the district. It did not encompass the reimbursement directly, that we get 100% reimbursement for the one-on-one aid that one of those students needs. And it was also done at the FY18, FY18's tuition rate. So the new number captures the FY19 tuition rate that's allowable by the state of Vermont, as well as the 100% reimbursement for the one-on-one aid that student gets in our school district. The interest income we decreased, that's kind of a no-brainer. If we don't have a ton of cash in the bank, we're not making a lot of interest. That was definitely an overstated budget item. I think that was something that was done in an effort to balance the budget originally. So I brought that down to what seemed reasonable for FY19, being very conservative with that. Does anyone have any questions on that one before I go to answering the next question? No?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the next question, I think a lot of people have kind of been trying to wrap their heads around, and the administration budget kind of gets a finger pointed at it, it seems like, quite a bit. Unfortunately, the district administration budget isn't just for administrators. It takes into account a lot of expenditures that are district-wide that can't easily be broken up and allocated to each individual school. So within the district administration budget, you do have your superintendent, your director of finance, your payroll administrator, your financial clerk, and your treasurer. But in addition, you have things like health and life insurance. You have the tuition choice and charter school tuition that's an assessment of our Chapter 70 from the state. So there's other things in here, shared health insurance or shared health supplies. You have your facilities director travel, and there's some other items in here that are just not easily allocatable out to the schools individually. What I did is I took, because like I said, I know this is something people keep kind of trying to understand, is I did a little calculation at the bottom here that shows last year we had an assistant superintendent and a superintendent / business manager. Their total salaries were $252,864. This year, the superintendent and director of finance combined salaries are $215,269, and we did have our assistant superintendent still on board for the first 3 months of the year before she retired, netting savings in FY19 alone of $9,800, and in FY20 it would actually net us a savings of $38,000 between those two positions. In addition, I just wanted to point out the other 3 staff members that are in this, which is our financial clerk, our payroll administrator, and our treasurer. And you can see those totals only went up by $780, and that was an increase in the treasurer's salary that had been put in the budget prior to my coming on board. So we're actually seeing some savings in the actual salaries in that line by the new structure that we have. The only new line for salaries that's in there is the food service director. To my understanding, that was a request of the prior administration along with the towns in light of the school lunch situation that the district has been in. So that is an added salary. So if you wanted to look into FY20 and take that away from our savings, we're still saving $5,000 or $6,000 with the new administration structure we've put into place. Some of the other increases I highlighted in bold just and kind of made some notes next to it. The financial overseer is obviously a legislation mandated position. That is currently budgeted at $45,000. We're not expecting that we're going to need to use all of that. Once Rick has been on board for 2 or 3 months, we'll relook at that, and he will help us decide if we can allocate some of that out to other expenditures in the district to use that money more wisely. The other one on here is unemployment taxes payable. It's $38,000 higher than it was in FY18 for 2 reasons. It was overspent in FY18 by $19,000 because it was under budgeted, which is part of the issues that the district has faced. And in addition, due to some of the layoffs and staff changes, our unemployment insurance rate has increased. So in FY18, our rate is 0.5%, and in FY19, it's actually going to be 0.9%. So it's almost doubling for our FY20 budget, and I just got that rate today from our human resources administrator. So we will be working on our budget with that.
I just want to give a word of explanation about the overseer. As some of you know, and you mentioned,
Yeah.
the person is appointed by the state, And it's financial overseer, I
Yeah,
believe.
so he's a financial overseer. We as a district do have the employment contract with him. He is a subcontractor for the district. We are responsible for paying him. But he was recommended to us by Jay Sullivan at the state.
Yeah.
He had previously been on control boards for the state, which is one level above the overseer position that he's serving for us.
He
So
used, his career, I believe, was with DOR.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me as though he's retired because he's doing consulting work now.
yeah, he's doing some consulting
And
work.
this is considered
Yeah,
consulting work.
he's very knowledgeable. He's been, worked really well with us. He's, come in, and we've, chatted back and forth. I've given him a bunch of reports. He seems to think we're, moving in the right direction. So like I said, he was going to be meeting with the state, I believe, this week to give them, a report that they had requested on where he thinks we're at and some of the things we might need to do to make things even better. So the next line down, of course, is health and life insurance. That's kind of like the donkey that you want to pin the tail on. Health and life insurance is one of the expenses that increases the most, I think, over the rest of our expenses each year. Health and life insurance is not something any of us want to have to pay for, but it goes up roughly an average between 5 and 6% each year between our active employees and our retiree employees. So you may have a 4% increase on the active employees, but a 7% on the retirees. It's kind of a fluctuating market. It's almost like the stock market. But one of the things that the district has not done well in the past, looking back, is budgeting for our exposure for employees that are eligible to come on the plan. So at any given point in time, you could have an employee that's husband loses their job and that makes them eligible for insurance. So if we don't have that budgeted, that puts us in a situation to be running in the negative. So
Now,
this year,
just for the records here, 75% paid by the district for the
Yes.
current employees,
Yep.
25 for the employees.
Yes.
Retirees, what's
it's
that?
the same percentage
Same.
for the retirees as the active employees.
Okay, thank you.
So this year we budgeted 5 HMO and 5 PPO plans into that health and life insurance line to cover our exposure. So you see the increase from FY18 to 19, even though we decreased our staff, that expenditure is still increased between the percentage that the cost is going up, in addition to the fact that we were trying to budget for those extra plans. The next one down is your employee separation costs. That is if we have individuals that retire early, that is part of their teacher's contract. We have early retirement incentives. Once again, it was under budgeted in FY18 and overspent, so I made sure that we got that in line for FY19 for the liability the district had for early retirement incentives, vacation payouts, and sick leave buyback. We have the new line of the food service director I mentioned, so that was a $32,000 increase in this particular section of the budget, as well as the food service subsidy by the general fund, which was a stipulation of the town meetings by the towns to fund the school lunch deficit. We have not moved that revenue to the school lunch fund yet. I will talk about that, a little bit later. That will be assessed as the year goes on and if we actually need to use that. The next line down is your tuition, school choice, and charter. As I mentioned before, that is our assessment for kids that go out of our district that offsets our Chapter 70 funds that we receive monthly. You can see that is going up. It's pretty clear-cut explanation. We have declining enrollment and we have increasing kids that are choicing and chartering out of the district, mainly because as we are seeing declining enrollment, that means we've been cutting staff, which in turn has been cutting services to the students. So one of the things I'll talk to a little bit later is the trends of the declining enrollment seem to be that there's not so much of a decline in the elementary as there at the middle school and high school. And that would indicate to me that the kids are choicing and chartering out to get services and educational programs that our district isn't offering right now. The special reserve contribution, that's $35,169 this year. Once again, it's another legislation mandated item. It's in our legislation how much of a percentage of our prior year budget year over year that we need to have set aside in this new special reserve fund that they have asked us for. And the other available funds line right now is a line that, as a result of revising our FY19 budget, any savings that we were able to capture by replacing some of the staff individuals that did leave the district, that we were able to replace with staff that might be at a lower step level, those funds are reserved. The reason I put it there in the district administration is because it then requires the school committee transfer to vote it to be spent anywhere. So it reserves it there and kind of controls it in that manner. I hope that answers a lot of your questions about the district administration budget. Like I said, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, and everyone
Let's just see.
was
Does
really
anyone have any
concerned.
questions? Yes, Tracy.
Yes. Do you have any sense how long the financial overseer will be?
So give me one second.
Sure.
So the legislation mandates that they're with us at least 3 years, while the district holds a bond for our deficit, so to speak. And after that 3 years, the commissioner could grant us to not have to have that person anymore. We expect that expense is going to continue to decrease as the years goes on, because we would expect that we would need less oversight as we put controls in place to make sure that we stay on our feet and don't get ourselves in the situation we're in now. So we expect that expense will go down. The expense that will stay for 5 years is a special reserve contribution, and that will stay. The 1.5% cumulative percentage of our budget will stay in place until the state basically thinks we're in a good position, and then they would allow us to release those funds to be voted by the school committee to be spent to, for capital projects or offsetting the budget, or, whatever they feel is appropriate. I don't expect that they would do that in less than 5 to 10 years, though. And it's not going to be a huge amount, but just something to kind of make sure that we're doing our due diligence.
So Tracy, I take it that he's probably doing other districts at the same time, and this is not full-time.
We're actually the only district that he is the overseer for right now. He is a consultant for a business, I guess, if you will, that does do some consulting for municipalities and school districts, but we are the only district that he's actually the overseer for right now.
Right now.
Yeah.
But he's free to take others on.
So he could, I suppose, if he wanted to, but he has backed off of some of the work that he was doing for the other consulting firm to help us out.
Yeah.
So until, he's kind of
Okay.
free agent, if you will.
Yes, yeah.
But his focus right now is serving our district as
Sure,
the overseer.
okay.
And I think he's doing a good job so far.
Okay.
Let's see. So the question on here in regards to our district administration budget is this sustainable 3-5 years out, et cetera? Obviously, the Heart Committee consultants are, did a study, they did a baseline, they've given us some numbers. And it's very clear that the way that we're operating right now is not sustainable. Even with the discussion of school closures, we're still going to have to either increase students and revenues or cut staff, services, buildings, whatever. So there's a lot of management decisions on the educational side that will need to be made to assist us in being sustainable, in addition to sharing some administrative services, which is another thing that the Heart Committee is also studying, how that could work and how it could work well, because you don't want to consolidate something or share something if it's not going to best serve your district and the other district you're sharing those with. So that is going to be the next step of their study after the forum that they have on Wednesday evening. So I think that covers that. The next question you guys had was talking about the breakdown of the number of schools for students in each school. So what I did is I brought the October 1, 2018 enrollment that gets reported to DESE with me. But I also brought an enrollment analysis that had been done from years 2013 to 17. And you can see that the decrease in the elementary school students, it was only about 61 students between the 4 schools over those 4 or 5 years. but the decrease at the high school was 84 students, an additional 84 students. So we lost 145 students at the middle school and high school over the same period of time that we only lost 61 students at the elementary school. So like I mentioned before, not being an educator, but understanding what this district has gone through and the decreasing enrollment, what that says to me on paper is that the kids are sticking through the elementary schools, but once they get to high school, they're utilizing other options in the area, whether it be choice or charter schools, Franklin Tech, that they're choosing to go to, as we've had to decrease the type of offerings that we have at Pioneer.
Somebody had a misconception about that. A tech school is not a choice out or anything like that.
No.
It's another, we belong to the tech school
Yeah.
district. There are
And
19
each of the, and what
19
happens with the tech schools is the towns actually pay that tuition directly to the tech school. The district does not pay that tuition. So that's directly paid through the towns as a tuition.
We have a budget from them
Yeah.
too.
Okay, so is that 84, are some of those students going to tech school? Is that included?
So this additional 84 is basically saying that 84 more kids left elementary than the high school. So of those 145, they would be going to the tech school or other schools. So regardless of where the towns are paying the tuition, it's lost enrollment at our schools. Which I know that's something that's kind of been brought to the table, and I don't know how much more discussion the towns or the district are interested in having, but the tech school allotment for the towns, I believe, is based on some enrollment numbers, and that hasn't been looked at for quite some time, so I don't know if that's something that the towns are interested in entertaining, reevaluating, because that certainly would decrease the number of students that would be allowed to go to the tech, but they could also still choice or charter out to another school. So if they really are not interested in coming to our high school, whether they go to tech or somewhere else, I think is going to be the same situation. So just something to think about as we have had declining enrollment. And we're not increasing our numbers. That was the other, we're not seeing any increases in any of the schools. And the other big piece that I keep talking about too is, you know, we had a lot more tuition and fees coming in from the Vernon students. But unfortunately with that plant closing, you've lost a lot of families, and it's not just Vernon students, it's families within probably a 30-mile radius of that plant in Vernon, families that were traveling in to work there that have moved out of the area as well for work. So people that lived here that worked there and moved out as well, I think are affecting some of that. The next question you guys had was talking about the money that was allocated for the food service department, which is that $50,000 I spoke to earlier. This is for our independent lunch fund, which is Fund 22. So in front of you, you guys have the July 1st rollover, basically from June 30th, showing the fund that these monies are held in, if you will. And if you look at the line that says fund balance, you will see that the cumulative deficit of the school lunch fund is $269,202.24. The fund balance is where the cumulative loss for the lunch program is being currently held. That will go to zero once the deficit financing bond is in place and the invoices for the towns for FY19, if that is how the overseer has recommended moving forward. So that will end up being wiped out in FY19, and any balance that's there going forward at the end of FY19 positively hope will be for this particular year itself. And like I said, once the year continues and Rob and I evaluate the school lunch program, we plan to do that probably every other month to see how things are going. We'll have a better idea how much of that $50,000, if any, hopefully we won't have to use any of it. That's my goal. So, which if we don't have to use any of that, you know, that would essentially mean that next year we could possibly budget a smaller amount for a subsidy because we would no longer be held by that $50,000 because we're not receiving those funds from the town through town meeting. But, you know, we may want to still keep something in there for a rainy day for the school lunch fund because there has been so much vulnerability kind of in that with declining students and costs going up and stuff. So myself and the food service manager are working on that currently to put together a budget for an actual budget for the school lunch to get some projections for this year. So that is that for the questions that you guys had. Does anybody have any questions back to me in pertaining any of those items?
Bernie, any questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple.
Sure.
I see the school lunch, you said you have the deficit of the 269,
Yes.
202, which is the accumulated deficit. What is the current budget status of the lunch program currently?
So currently we are in the black. One of the things that I'm hoping to report at our school committee meeting that is coming up in December is where that would look like at the end of the year, because what happens is at the end of the school year, we have those summer salaries, which even though they don't get paid till the summer, they need to be allocated out through the year.
Yeah.
So we're trying to put together a mechanism so that we can show a percentage of those for each of those months, even though they weren't an actual expense, to give a better picture of where the lunch fund will actually be at the end of the year with those summer salaries being paid out. Because what happened last year is it looked like we broke even, but once we paid out those summer salaries and encumbered those, it then put it into
So you're
a
talking about
deficit essentially.
they get paid on a 12-month basis?
Yes,
if
so they
chose.
have the option to get 26 pays. So what happens is they get 1/26 of their paycheck
Yeah.
through the school year, and then at the end of the school year, we encumber those 4 pays that they get over the summertime. And that's what has not been necessarily accounted for and allocated throughout the year when we're looking at the school committee lunch reports that go to the state. So we're looking to try to put a mechanism in that report that we give to the school committee that will allocate out those lunch salaries that are paid in the summer to kind of allocate them throughout the year to give a better true picture of where the lunch fund is.
Okay, that answer?
The other thing is, I don't see any possible projections or any ideas stated here. You're in the current negotiating or have, I don't know if it's still in abeyance or still active, negotiating with the teachers union. What are your plans for the potential cost of that those negotiations might be for the next fiscal year?
Unfortunately, I can't talk about negotiations, but we do have negotiation meetings in the upcoming weeks, so hopefully we'll have a better idea of where those are, but that is not something that I can speak about in this meeting, unfortunately.
The other question I have here is, where is the status of the fiscal 17 and fiscal 18 audit?
So the 17 audit was done and the report was given at our last school committee meeting. And the 18 audit is currently being performed. Today was their first day. They were in the office. It was originally scheduled for January 22nd, but we were able to move that up. So they are in the office doing the audit. And one of the things that, to our benefit, that came out just today is there was actually an audit adjustment from FY17 that they did not give to me in the total of $9,282 that is to the benefit of the general fund. In the past administrative treasurer position that was in place, there had been a deposit that was like double recorded in our school choice fund that really belonged to the general fund, and that was not in their audit adjustments that they gave me. So you'll notice on the next sheet over, there's an audit adjustment lines that shows that 9282 in addition to another $1,000 in income that I found that was recorded in FY18 by the prior treasurer in the wrong account. So that will be moved over to the general fund as well.
Okay, and what's the current accumulated deficit as of today?
If you look at the next sheet from where I was at after the school lunch, the cumulative deficit decreased from $659,000 to $543,000. That is not audited, but that is where my books closed. And once those are audited, those will be reviewed.
542.
543,388.
Thank you.
So yeah, it's on the sheet that you have in front of you.
Right.
So that's a cumulative
Thank
of the
you.
general fund, the school lunch, and the circuit breaker, are the 3 funds that had been in deficit in the prior year.
And what is the school department's plan for the repayment of that over the period of time? Now, you have the opportunity for the loan for up to 10 years. Is your plans to pay it off as soon as possible or to extend it for the entire 10-year of the loan?
We are going to be at the mercy of the state and how we handle that, as far as I understand. I know that John and myself would like to try to pay that off in a shorter period of time, seeing as it's not the $2 million that was originally thought that it could possibly be up to. It's really going to come down to the interest rate, I believe. Obviously want to decrease costs to the district as much as possible, but if it's only going to cost us an extra couple $1,000s to have that out over 10 years versus 5 years, then we might recommend or ask that we take that for the 10 years, because it's not going to cost the district a whole lot more, and it would free up cash to restore the services to the students. So that'll be discussions that will be had with the overseer and myself and the superintendent, hopefully in the near future once the audit's complete.
Wouldn't the towns have
Certify the
something to say
deficit.
about that?
I don't know, because it's not going to be like a typical bond, the way that you guys fund not deficit, but the way you guys fund borrowing.
Yeah.
It's going to be part of our normal operating budget. So that payment will be part of our normal operating budget. So
Okay.
it will go through your normal assessments just like any other expenditure will. It's not going to be an addition to item. And I know we briefly touched on that when we all met in the auditorium, but there was a lot of people there and a lot of information flying around, so it was kind of hard to convey that that evening. But it will be part of the normal operating budget, so it won't be an additional assessment to the towns. It will be part of that budget that we have to balance as a district.
Now, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, 19 is a balanced budget now.
Yes.
Okay, 18 is okay. This deficit goes back to 17?
So if you look, there's a column on here that shows the FY17 final deficit of those funds. We decreased that total deficit in FY18 by $115,000. We were able to decrease the general fund deficit by freezing the expenditure budget in the middle of the year. So even though we came short of our revenues, we also didn't spend the entire expenditure budget. In addition to some prior year fund balance cleanups that I did, I went back all the way to FY9 for every single fund we had and followed them through to make sure that any adjustments that I did or cleanup was valid. So we did some cleanup there as well, in addition to the couple audit adjustments that we've found so far that were actually from FY17, which allowed us to decrease that deficit by $25,000. The school lunch deficit did increase by $3,000 in FY18, but certainly not as substantial as it had been in the past. It still kept it under the $270,000 that the towns had previously approved to cover. And then the circuit breaker deficit decreased by $93,000, which was the income that we received that year, and we didn't spend anything out of that fund. All the special needs tuition was paid directly out of the general fund.
Okay, so this is a summary, this is a total of all of those
Yes,
items.
it's a total of all of those, yes.
Okay.
So overall, we decreased the department's deficit in FY18.
So the hope is to clean up all of this deficit.
Yes. So what will happen when we get the deficit financing is it will be considered bond proceeds. So all of these negative deficits that are in these fund balances, it'll be considered revenue to that fund, and those will go away, and we essentially start fresh for FY19.
Now, the overseer said to me that he thought the borrowing had to be a note each year. It couldn't be, we think, yes, in terms of maybe 10 years or 5 years, whatever. But he said it has to be a new one each year.
So what's going to happen is we will get a temporary note this year. So, and the reason that they're doing that is they want to fund us a certain amount. And then I think when the audit is complete and the numbers are certified and all that, they will give us another amount. I have actually recommended that they just wait until the audit is done, because I think we're in a decent enough situation that we're really not going to need the funds until the end of the year when it comes time to pay those summer pays again, because that seems to be what hurts us every year. So It would be a temporary note for this year, and then it will renew July 1st of next year, but when it renews July 1st of next year, that's when it becomes a permanent bond.
Oh, I see. Oh, it's just 1 year is temporary
Yes,
then.
so this year is temporary, and then it becomes however many years you're going to borrow for.
Okay,
And that's my understanding from Jay, so
okay.
hopefully that's, so yeah, so, and they do that so that, and because we were going to have the mechanism to deficit spend in FY19, their thought was they would fund this deficit, and then if we needed a deficit in 19, we'd get more money, and
I
then they
see.
would combine it.
Okay.
But I'm hoping we just borrow once, close it out, permanent bond it in July, and move forward.
Jane and Ginger, finance committees from the other towns, you have any questions about that part of it? Any of it so far?
I don't think so.
So I think essentially, with looking at the 543, if we allow the
Yeah,
towns, which it sounds like he has given permission to do that, to pay the 90,000, that would bring us down to 450. And the circuit breaker deficit of the 46,000 is also being covered this year by the revenues being brought in by the circuit breaker, because we took that into account with our special ed tuition. So I'm not sure that they would make us borrow that either. So my hopes is that we're going to be borrowing closer to 400,000.
yeah, that's,
But like I said, until everything's audited and
The lower the
certified,
better.
and they bless my numbers, you know, we don't have a for sure. But we're only 1 day into the audit, but things are looking
Yeah.
pretty good. So I'm happy about that.
well, that's good that they got started earlier. They weren't gonna come till January. really.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you know, it's not that they didn't want to come out, but because this district has closed their books later than most districts in the past, they have had us on their schedule for April. So moving us up in that large of a firm was kind of difficult for them to do, but Mary Jane was able to
Yeah.
kind of help push a little more and get them
Okay.
in earlier for us. And I
Okay.
was able to get them all their
Bernie?
documentation.
I just have one more question.
Sure.
Obviously, I viewed preliminary what the Heart Committee has said, that they're
Yeah.
looking at increases substantially in the deficit
Yes.
in the next upcoming fiscal years. Do you agree with that, or you disagree
So
with that?
if you look at the next page in your booklet,
Gotcha.
I have just a summary. I'm not going into a lot of details because they're going to do that on Wednesday night. I was a big part of putting this baseline scenario together with Mark Abrams, who is the financial member of the Heart Committee Consultants.
Yeah.
He's a CPA in Massachusetts, and he works with a lot of municipalities and school districts. And a lot of the expenses are a little more generalized than the revenues. The revenues, I'm pretty confident in those numbers. The Chapter 70 is pretty stale, unfortunately, because we had really high enrollment. And as our enrollment has decreased, they don't take that money away, but we're not going to see any increases either, which is why it puts the burdens back on the towns or us trying to get outside students in via tuition choice, you know, and choicing into the district. The expenditures, we used an average of 2.5% increase for most expenditures. Taking into account, you know, COLA increases and increases that are already built into some of our contracts. There are larger increases that were taken into consideration for health and life insurance, obviously, as well as some utility expenditures. I did present some of that information to the other towns, but you guys are going to get a huge pamphlet with all that information on Wednesday that will have all of the analysis for all of the schools, that will give you a breakdown of all those expenditures. FY20, we're looking at 409,000 that particular year, 621 in FY21, and the number just gets bigger as the years go on, because basically what's happening is each year the district's expenses by nature of, you know, increased contracts or health and life insurance, which is one of our largest expense, they're going up 4.5% to 5%, but the towns, our Chapter 70 is staying stagnant. Our tuition is going down because the kids coming, from Vernon are less and less each year. So the tuition and fees up here for FY20 and 21 take into account that we have 2 out of those 10 kids graduating this year, and then another few graduating those following years. So those tuition and fees numbers do take into account the kids that will graduate out, and we're not expecting to increase the number of kids coming in from Vernon. But the capacity to raise money from the towns is limited based on your guys' Prop 2.5. So meeting that gap gets harder and harder every year because the expenses continue to go up, but the availability of revenues is only 2.5 to 3%. So that gap continues to grow. So cumulatively over the next 4 years, they're looking at $3 million. Obviously, if we're only financing 400,000, that number is going to be dependent on how long we finance it for and what the actual amount is. But these are estimates, and like I said, you guys will get a better picture line by line with the expenditures of where those figures came from Wednesday night. But I wanted you guys to just kind of have a snapshot. But it was a very intense study. They'll go through the whole Chapter 70, how that's calculated, why the numbers are staying the same, and so forth. So I didn't want to give you guys that same information twice. But it was a very in-depth financial study that I was very involved with Mark. So.
Yeah. Bernie?
Well, obviously, from the numbers that have just been presented before us here, that is going to be a substantial hit to the taxpayers of this community who are going to probably be not happy about this.
Well, and this is where the school
we have
closures
to get a message to the schools that you're going to have to make some changes here, and you're going to have to make some cuts, because this is unsustainable for the long term here for this community. We have taxpayers already complaining about the burden that's placed upon them. We aren't seeing much significant growth in population or in property values or any new development, and this kind of thing is going to they're going to scream bloody murder here. And we are going to have to insist that there's going to have to be some curtailment of the growth, or we have no choice here. We also have other things that are going to have to be, taken care of in this community. We just can't, I'm all for taking care of the schools and the children, but there's other things that are going to have to be addressed here in this community that needs work. And I guess the message is going to have to be clearly sent that you're going to have to change. You're going to have to find some other ways of trying to either rein in the budget spending, especially with declining enrollment, or you're going to be faced with hitting a brick wall, because I guess there's only so much money you can take from the taxpayers in this community.
Well, and that's where, with this projection, like I mentioned, last year the average increase to the towns was about 4.7%. So with this budget, we're looking at just a 2.5% increase to the towns. And what that does essentially, and I know I don't have your guys' budget in front of me, but the other towns I've met with, the school budget essentially is about 50% of your guys' budget. So, but what I saw looking at the other towns' budgets is that because those increases have been more than that Prop 2.5 that I speak of, the towns have unfortunately not been able to do the things that they need. So if we can consolidate services, share services, and get this gap down so that we can be sustainable, then that also helps the town as well, because then you guys have more of your increased capacity to spend to meet the needs of the towns. So we are not, as a district, trying to drain the towns, and that's why I'm having these meetings with the towns, because I want to actually, and I requested at the other towns, have a copy of your last 2 years' budgets. I know some of them are out on the websites, but every town's websites are a little bit different. So I've been looking at the budgets of the towns for the last 2 years, as well as the tax recaps, just to get an idea of where the tax levy is, where the capacity, what your rates have been, as well as where you guys are spending your money and where you guys have had to cut to meet the needs of the district, so that we can hopefully come to some middle ground as we go through this process to balance our budgets.
Something that a little bit, maybe, I don't know if you'd call it misleading or what, but the fact that we had the campus taxable for a few years bumped our levy limit up.
Yeah.
And once they became tax exempt again, if we continued to spend at that level, it would have just fallen on our homeowners
Right.
to pay all of that.
Yeah.
So we did not spend up to that levy limit
Right.
deliberately, because we know our
And a lot of the towns around here, I think Bernardston is pretty close to their capacity. But Warwick and Leiden both did have excess capacity, and I haven't yet looked at Northfield's tax recap to see what that capacity is. But I have looked at, you know, the new growth in the towns, the stabilization fund balances and stuff like that. And it's clear across all the towns that even though you're getting free cash every year and you have some new growth, you guys are dipping into your stabilization funds and using up your free cash to fund those projects every year that aren't being funded in the normal budget process.
It was just in recent years that we've even been able to put anything in a stabilization fund. And we've kind of held our breath all those years that, well, you don't have a furnace give out in a town building or a vehicle that crashed or something and wasn't covered.
And I think one of you guys mentioned at the meeting we had before, your guys' fire station is
it's in bad shape.
So
Yes.
what we're hoping to do here is try to keep the district sustainable without losing services to the students, and hopefully being able to get some of those services back, but being able to consolidate the amount of students we have in classes and things. So that is on the superintendent side, but him and I are working together and do communicate, and you know, we're all working towards the same goal. But we're trying to do
you
it
invited
without
him. He evidently had a conflict tonight or something.
I'm not sure what his conflict was this evening, but I did mention to all the towns that this was basically my initial meeting with you guys, that I had mentioned I would have to kind of answer these questions, have that first touch base talking about the budget going forward. And my plan going forward will be probably sometime in January, once we have our numbers from, you know, our first round of governor's budget numbers, and rough drafts of the budgets from the administrators, to come back out and kind of talk to you guys then again and let you know where we're at and what kind of, you know, cuts or consolidations or, you know, those types of things that the superintendent and myself are looking at. And those are the meetings I think that'll be more beneficial for him and I both to be at, because he can speak to the education, you know, side of the budget and why we're doing certain things educationally. And then obviously it's my job to try to balance it.
Okay. One concern I have is that it started out, there was the possibility of a deficit of $1 million for this current year's
Yep.
budget. And then I believe you went through the accounts and found $500,000 in some account that had been set aside that wasn't
Yes.
needed. And then there were some other adjustments you were able to make to
Yeah.
balance that. Now, if the budget continues at, you know, well, you've given us some figures here,
Yeah.
but we don't have those accounts to
No.
turn over anymore into.
Well, and it wasn't necessarily that it was money found, so to speak, but as you know, and I think the finance committees know, and a lot of other people in the towns know, the staff that was in place, whether it be the treasurer or administration, it was a lot of matter of paper and books and where things were booked or not booked properly.
Yeah.
So this has been a huge cleanup process of finding those things and making things right, so that we have processes and controls in place to make sure that they're happening correctly going forward. So yes, we're not going to find, you know, $538,000 in a PO that was created that we thought was to encumber for summer insurance, but it was really for the year. And you know, there was a lot of miscommunications and misunderstanding, I think, between the financial staff members that were on board before, simply not being educated or understanding. So I've tried to not only do the job, but also educate the financial and payroll clerk, that so we're all talking on the same page and we all understand what's going on. So no, we're not going to be able to find those types of things, but I'm glad that we're not in a $1.2 million deficit. It's a lot easier to come out of, you know, 400 or 450 than it is $1 million. And it makes the recovery efforts hopefully that much faster, as well as obviously being able to serve the students and bring some of those services back to them that they had to go without this year, because we thought we were in the position we had and some cuts were made, you know,
Yeah.
in the thought that that's where we were at.
Okay,
So-
Bernie? any-
No, I have no further
All
questions.
right,
almost.
Dan?
I'm good.
So,
Anybody finance?
Ginger's,
any questions?
poor Ginger's heard this a couple times. And
Jenny?
like I said, I changed it up a little bit tonight just because you guys are going to hear the information I presented to Warwick and Leiden again on Wednesday night in further detail. But I just wanted to have that initial meeting and answer any questions, and feel free to email me, you know, if you guys have questions after the meeting, need further clarification. I'm happy to provide any information that you guys need, and at any point, not just now, but
I think
very open.
most of us are planning to go Wednesday night and hear what the
Yes.
the consultants of the Heart Committee's reports are.
Yeah.
So, Tracy, are all set? Nothing?
And if anybody can't come, those will be posted on our website the day after, so the information will be out. It's just hard. I think Tracy might have, and I think Bernardston also requested if I was going to pass anything out to kind of see it ahead of time. But I find that if you give people a bunch of papers with numbers on them and there's no explanations to go with it, people kind of run wild and their minds go wild and they ask a lot of questions, and if they don't have the answers, sometimes the information can be perceived in a different manner. So that's why I prefer to just bring it with me and discuss it. So I would say that if you can be at the meeting Wednesday night, it is definitely more beneficial than just trying to look through their PowerPoints and
So is it safe to
understand
say-
it.
So is it safe to say that you have a better handle at what's going on than they did in the past, so that this, you'll nip it in the bud the next time as far as doing that, so you won't see this kind of a deficit happening to us?
No, and I think the budgeting process is also going to be a lot more communicative between myself and the administration. I think in the past, it was a matter of the budget was put together and it was handed to the principals and they were asked to say yay or nay, or maybe not even given a choice in it. So this is going to be a much more collaborative effort in the budget building process, back and forth communications to come to, you know, what the district needs, what the schools need, what the principals want.
I think
So
one of the best things to
it'll be
do
a
is
better
get
process.
all the finance committees involved, because we know what we need to run our towns. We know you know what you need to run the school, and we have to work together, or else both of us will go down in flames as far as doing it. So I think we're starting good because of the meetings that we're going to have with the other towns as far as doing that. But you're going to see that the towns are going to come in as a united force from now on, which it used to be that was one town would say, okay, we're going to do this and that. But I think the towns are at the point right now that if we don't become united, then things will not go as smoothly as it could possibly go. And again, there's going to be a lot of communication between the towns and the school, because it seemed like we see the budget come up at town meeting and with some type of telling us what it's all about.
Right.
But it was too late at that particular
Right.
point in time.
Now you guys
And
need to
then
have it in
yeah,
advance and
yeah,
understand
and-
what's in it and why.
Oh, definitely, as far as doing it. And then it became, basically people said, yes, we don't want to stop, education of kids. But what I'm seeing sometimes in the budget, that most of the money is going less to the students and teachers and more to the administration. And that to me is kind of like the wrong way of thinking, because if you take it away from the students and the teachers, especially the teachers, then that's why you're getting more school choice out of there, because you start losing really good teachers. So, something people have to really think about where we want to be. And I think our education of our kids is one of the most important things we have. It's probably the only thing that we have basically here as a industry, really, that we put out a very good product. And it seems to be lacking that a little bit. So we've got to rethink how we're going about doing things. And I think the best thing to do is, getting together as a group and coming out with the best possible scenario for everybody involved. Because, like Bernie was saying, the towns in their own start to lack
Right.
things that need to be done.
And that's what I've seen in
Yeah.
the towns that I have been to already, and looking at their budgets and seeing decreases in their expenditures, but the increase on the school side. So my plan will be to have, the initial meetings, the principals will fill out their wish list, if you will. Not really, that's a wish list, but it'll be the department recommended budget, so to speak. And then it'll be an administrator's recommended budget, and then a school committee's voted budget. So there's going to be a process, so we'll be able to see the changes of where we wanted to be and where we end up at the end of the day. And in between there is going to be the meetings with the towns and understanding your guys' budget and where you guys are at. But also looking at, I know you guys are all probably in the middle of or have come pretty close to setting your tax rates for the next year too. So once that is done and we have our preliminary governor's budget, I think knowing where those revenues are at is going to be important to be able to move on to that next step in the budget process.
the tax rate, you're meeting with the assessors soon? Yeah. Tomorrow?
Yes.
Tomorrow morning, okay.
The other thing I just wanted to mention, excuse me, Lois, was
Sure.
that part of the, forgive me, some of our frustration with the schools, the department, I should say, or PBRS, was obviously the deficit, the lack of clear information, just the mess that's occurred has frustrated us a great deal. And we kind of see, we put all other departments under scrutiny when they come before us, and we don't treat them any differently than the schools, because we get as much efficiency and financial responsibility from each department, and we don't treat them any different from the schools. But forgive me, they've been pretty responsible, they've lived within their means, so unfortunately now we have to say, your expectation has to be the same as what we require other departments to be. The other thing is we try to also be fiscally prudent with our stabilization and also doing some capital improvements while we had the assets, because they have been neglected for so long. And then we also have to deal with OPED. That's another issue that we have to deal with. I mean, we can't forget it anymore. We have to deal with it. So we do have some fiscal constraints we're facing.
And the schools have the OPEBs and the pension as well, the 68 and the 75. So we're all in the same boat with that as well. But the district's not in a position to be funding those in addition to what we're paying annually right now either. So when you look at our audited financial statements, we have this huge liability out there. But that's statewide. I mean, that's part of the OPEB. Unfortunately, but I understand where all the towns are coming from. You guys have been without information, and some of the information you have had hasn't even been accurate. So I'm hoping that I've been able to provide more clarity and transparency. Sometimes maybe too much, but I would rather the school committee and the finance committees be more educated than not educated.
One thing I would hope in the future, and hopefully it's not going to happen anyway, but what people are remembering is the $1 million deficit for the current year, the $1 million for last year. And even though you try to say, it isn't that now, it isn't that.
It's hard to get past that because that was in the public for so long.
Yes, it's hard to get past it. Now, the other thing is, when you talk about the figures, increase 2.5, what it works out to mathematically frequently is whatever the budget increase is for each town, or our share, translates into about double that for the assessment. That's the way it works out, right, Jane?
Right.
Well, and that's how I was going to say last year, I didn't bring the sheet in with me, I did have it, but the average increase to the towns was like 4.7%.
Yeah.
So it was your entire Prop 2.5, not just 50% of that 2.5.
Yeah.
So that's where this budget that we're looking at, the revenue numbers that we projected, is 2.5% of the assessment, not 2.5% of what you guys have available to spend. And like I said, because the school tends to be 50% of the budget, if we can stay within these constraints of the budget increase assessments to the towns, then that still allows the towns some increased capacity for their needs as well, rather than taking all of your increased capacity.
Okay.
But obviously we're both trying to, you guys are running the town, and John and I are trying to run the district. So, but John also has ideas, and is working on a lot of things behind the scenes too, of how to try to get more students into the district and increase that so that we can, become more sustainable without having to cut services to the students or cut more staff. So between that and myself, we're hoping to be able to.
I was talking over the weekend to a member of the tech school committee that's been quite involved in tech school for quite some years, and he said their enrollment keeps increasing, but we know we're losing students. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not happy with it's a choice. If they're not going to go to college, they want to learn a trade. And that's a legitimate reason for going there. So it isn't always negative to Pioneer.
And we need those. We need those tech students.
Oh, we do.
I think so many kids are go to college, but it's not for everybody either. So it's nice that we have that resource, but I think we're losing more students than we need to be losing, because there are some programs that we could be providing at Pioneer that would facilitate some of those needs, or, you know, being able to have an AA when you leave the high school, having some of those technical skills that they're learning at other schools. So,
And occasionally, we have something that our tech school doesn't offer that's offered at Smith Vogue. And the towns have to pay. Your superintendent has to approve it, so forth, before they can go. But I believe we're going to have a student like that. So then we have that tuition plus transportation for that. So
and the special ed, you know, costs, those tend to continue to be on the rise as well. So I know John is working with the SPED director to hopefully create some programs there that might decrease some of our expenses within the district.
yeah,
And
we
possibly
try to
bring
keep
some
them within the
students.
district
Yes.
rather than
Yeah.
out of district placement.
And our SPED director that we currently have has done a really good job of not only creating programs for the students in the district, but also trying to integrate them back into the classrooms, which
I
has
see.
been really nice too.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's a lot going on the education side too that's hopefully gonna meet with the finance piece and
Yeah.
help keep us sustainable and hopefully keep our enrollment at least level instead of continuing to decrease. But there was a study that came out back in 2009. I don't know if anybody saw it or how much weight was put on it, but it did project the declining enrollments that we are seeing in 2020. But I think because it was so long ago, it's
Yeah.
projected 10 years out, it kind of, you know, wasn't necessarily paid attention to enough to
I
be that red
understand,
flag.
actually, and I don't pretend to try to compare the percentages, but enrollment throughout Franklin County is
Yeah,
down
it is.
anyway.
And it's all across rural Massachusetts. It's not
Yeah.
just Franklin County. I mean, I worked in Ashburnham and Ashburnham, Westminster. You know, all of your school districts are down. And a lot of it has to do with jobs in the area.
Yeah.
You know, if
Nothing
there's
to
no
pre-
work, people, you know, young families with kids have to move. And
That's right, so they're not
it's a
moving
function
into
of
the
that.
area, so that, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, are there any further questions? Anybody want to ask?
I had a comment that I hope you will do the same presentation for Bernardston next
Yep.
week that you did tonight with
Okay.
all that information. But
the
my question is, when you described the budgeting process, you never mentioned the budget committee of the school district. Where
So-
do they fit into this?
we haven't set our schedule for the budget subcommittee, but the first piece of the process is the actual administrators, the principals putting together their wants and needs to maintain the programs that they're offering. And then myself and John take that to the budget subcommittee, have those discussions, and we have a schedule that will be put together very shortly now that we have new subcommittee chairs moving forward. So we hopefully will have a schedule for those budget subcommittees soon. We were hoping to meet before the school committee meeting, but we weren't able to get everybody together. So hopefully that meeting will happen soon, and then we'll have an actual calendar for the budget season. But I have kind of a template that I put together that I used, a schedule that was done 2 or 3 years ago, as well as I've touched base with Gil Montague and looked at what their budget schedule looks like, and I've kind of put a mock schedule together of how I'd like to see the budget move through the process.
Normally, most of the towns have a representative at that school budget committee meeting. Each of the, and I've been going to them for years, and I've seen them start as early as December.
Well, and that's our plan was to have our first meeting actually before
And you
this.
just didn't mention them, so I,
No, the budget subcommittee meetings is part of the whole process, but before that happens, the process of the principals putting their budgets together, and then those go to the budget subcommittee meeting, and then portions of the budget go to the school committee at different dates. Right now, my plan is for the full budget to be voted at the March 14th school committee meeting, and then there would be a public hearing sometime in February ahead of that. So, but all those dates have to be put into place. We have a whole new school committee and all new budget subcommittee and other subcommittee chairs. So those schedules are being worked on, and hopefully will be in place very soon.
March 14th.
March 14th is our March meeting, and based on when the budget has been voted in the past, I'm hoping that will be when we can vote our and that gives the towns also enough time, to have the time in addition to whatever they've already seen, to have the
it's putting it-
conversations and.
Pushing it pretty close.
So we usually get it in February.
So there's the public hearing in February, but the actual school committee would vote on that budget in March. Last year, they didn't vote on it until April.
They usually vote on it right there that same night as the public hearing, and they've been voting it right then.
See, they had the schedule I looked at was from a couple of years ago where they had a public hearing in February in the Kiva section department, and then they had a meeting later where they actually voted it. So
I've been the last 2 years, and it's been done the same night, right, Jane?
Right, just this past year that it wasn't done the same night.
if we can do it in February, that would be great, and I would be all for that. But I will say it's definitely going to be a longer process probably this year because we want to make sure that all parties involved can be involved, as well as doing as much due diligence as we can.
Well, there are some legal requirements about when the towns have to be notified, and I don't know them off the top of
I
my
don't
head.
know. We have already
I
sent,
want to say it's March 1st, but I have to double check. I actually just looked at that the other day.
it might be, I'm not sure. Just from the town's perspective, we sent what we call our budget letter, budget request letter to all of our departments. And the budgets have to be in now, so that, and we have to put together, and the school is the last thing we'll have to be putting together a budget to see how much money we've got and what we can allocate where and so forth. And Bernie alluded to the fact that we call most of our departments in and have we talk to 2 or 3 of them each time. We'll meet almost weekly.
And that's how the meetings we foresee, or I foresee, going with the principals of the schools, the special ed director, and those types of things. And those, as soon as this audit process is done in the next week or so, that's going to be what's going to be happening.
We
after
don't.
That, so.
We don't take 2 or 3 departments one night and say, yeah, okay, yours sounds good.
No, we'll be meeting with them individually.
We don't tell anybody. We don't allocate any money until we have all the requests in, and then we see what we've got. So the sooner the school could get it to us, the better off we'll be, because our town meeting is the first Monday in May.
And I think because we just went through the revision process, this is kind of fresher in everyone's head going through the budget process, as well as, like I said, I've been swimming in these numbers for quite a few months now, even before I was appointed to this position. So I think it's going to be a smoother process than it's been in the past. And like I said, having the open communications with the budget subcommittee, obviously the school committee and the departments, I think is going to make it easier. But because this is a year coming out of recovery as well, there's more time that's going to need to be spent to make sure that everybody's where we need to be too. So we want to do it right, but we also want to make sure that we meet the needs of the towns too from a time perspective. And Jane, just so you know, you mentioned the meeting with Bernardston next week. They have called that off until John and I can both be at the meeting. And John cannot be at that meeting because we have split negotiations.
It's posted for next Monday. I don't know who said it's called off.
They canceled it today until John and I can both be at the meeting. They were not interested in meeting with just myself. They requested the superintendent and myself.
Well, don't take it off your calendar yet because no one consulted me.
But we do have negotiations meetings on the 10th and 17th. So, but yeah, so if you guys, and I did ask that if the other town had questions that they present that to me so that I didn't have the same format that I presented here tonight. So, thank you guys.
Any further questions? Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second. Oh, please.
I'll second the motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Select board?
And we'll return. Second. All in favor? Aye.
All right.
Thank you for coming, I appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Thank
And like
you.
I said,
Thank
if
you.
anyone